four sides.
Yep.
Unless it passed certain tests. Is that what this is talking about?
No, so you're talking about more of that. That used to be a way they would do it. Yeah, and so some manufacturers on the best side were making standalone cabinets that were their own enclosure, and then when someone wanted a bigger scale, when it passed a certain size, they would just put multiple of those cabinets inside a shipping container and ship it out the door, call it a day. So that was around those specific cabinets, how you had to have, if they were a standalone cabinet, you had to have some type of procedure around managing that. What this is more talking about is a bigger system when you get into a full, designed as a full BESS system, but also where it applies to data centers is when you start putting UPS batteries inside a prefabricated enclosure. So if you start doing like a power module or you start doing something like that sitting outside of a data center where you've got lithium-ion batteries in a confined space with other things, this is really dictating what happens as a result of that. And I'll jump into that a little more in detail. We'll come back to that one. Thermal runaway propagation, another one, just outlining how thermal runaway events occur and trying to prevent propagation not only from cell to cell or module to module, but now also from unit to unit. Most of the time these enclosures or these systems are sitting stacked beside other ones very closely. So this is how can you mitigate so that if a thermal runaway event does occur, it doesn't propagate to something beside it. So again, big one. Here's where you get into the two different codes between Rule 68 and Rule 69. What they're really trying to get at is gas. Go ahead.
How does this affect existing installations?
Great question. I will get to that. That's coming. So just remember that. We'll hold off if you don't mind. Really what happens, I don't know, is anyone familiar with what happens when a battery goes into thermal runaway? What's the first thing that takes place? Anyone know? Good answer. So typically the first thing that's going to happen when a battery goes into thermal runaway, it's going to start emitting hydrogen. So it's going to start emitting gas. So what these are trying to do is basically get this LVO, that lower flammable limit, and trying to keep that VOC level down. Because obviously what started and sparked a lot of this, if you remember back to the real world example we used in the first case, the battery energy storage plant in Arizona, that the firefighters opened the door and it exploded. What ended up happening is these batteries are emitting hydrogen before they go into thermal runaway. Previous thought around this was, okay, it's a fire. How do you starve a fire? Remove the oxygen. So if you just seal the enclosure, then you can stop the fire from happening and try to stop the propagation that way. Well, when these are emitting hydrogen and VOCs in a confined sealed space, now you're essentially creating a pressure cooker with hydrogen. So you're making a hydrogen bomb. Hence why all of a sudden this became a very big issue. So now it's, okay, we need to vent that gas, and if we can pick up the hydrogen as it starts emitting from the battery prior to it going into thermal runaway, you can try to prevent the thermal runaway event from even occurring. So they're trying to keep that lower flammable limit and trying to detect it earlier, because the thought is if you can catch it before it goes into thermal runaway, you might be able to stop it. Now again, this is all around managing the enclosure and things. I will say the technology around the power electronics and things that are doing this is also rapidly catching up. So I think you'll start to see that play into this as well. But a lot of this is talking about the cabinets, and then you were talking about ESS cabinets as well. So those standard individual ones, because code traditionally used to say it was a large-scale energy storage system, those individual cabinets kind of skirted under the radar. And so they were having similar issues where they would either explode, have thermal runaway events. They didn't have deflagration panels. So if they sealed up and then basically someone opened the panel, that inrush of oxygen would cause it to basically blow. And so you'd shoot shrapnel. So they're now trying to say, okay, if you're going to do, instead of doing that code test, if you're going to have an individual cabinet, that cabinet has to be deemed a system. So you'd have a 9540A test applied to that system. If you're going to take that same cabinet, put 4 or 5 of them together in one enclosure, okay, now you're going to system test that enclosure, or that bigger system of all of those combined. But you do typically a 9540A test on the cell, then you do it on the battery modules, and then you'll do it on the system. The system being either the individual cabinet or the bigger strings connected together.
So going back to the microphone, to that whole, so what do? Do they put some type of fire suppression inside the cabinet that would extinguish it once it reaches that 25%, I guess?
So this is all new. The 25% is a new threshold. Typically speaking, in energy storage systems prior to this, they would use a gas called Novac. There was a Novac 1230, and then there was another one, 12-something-something that 3M made. They basically stopped making it. But the idea was you would spray this gas in, because they did learn very early on, sealing up the system was a bad idea. So then the thought was, okay, use water. Well, water, once these things start going up and run away, water's not gonna help. And what ended up happening is they would just dump water on these, they would seal the enclosure, and that would try to somewhat contain it, but then what happens once the event is done, you go to open the doors, now you've got a whole bunch of toxic water that just runs out of the floor. So they started using a Novak system that would essentially try to spray a gas to eliminate the oxygen and hydrogen and try to prevent and contain the system that way. That's now going away. The only two manufacturers are making 3M and someone else, they no longer make that gas. So you will still see suppression and sprinkler systems in there that will also be tied with gas detection. That's what's coming with these.
They can't be like a foam system, just like dump foam all over.
You can, I mean, but the same situation comes up where they had problems before when they were just filling it with water. Again, once these things burn, once they start, and if they get to a thermal runaway event, there's pretty much nothing you can do besides sit back and watch. Now, that's not the right answer, but, so if you dump foam, if you dump water, you do something in there, okay, that's fine. But then once it's done, what do you do with that foam after? How do you get it out without just dumping it onto the ground? So there was a big one that happened in California recently that had the same issue, that when basically they flooded all the modules, they then opened it up and just the groundwater became very saturated and very high toxic levels very quickly, because that water just sat in this enclosure for 8 hours, just taking in all these chemicals. And then they opened the doors, you can't catch it, just gone. So now they're trying to get smarter about this and how to mitigate it. So again, these are the cabinets, the explosion control requirements. So, all right. So what does this mean for UPS applications, for data centers? How does this tie into? So first thing, HMAs. Obviously, these are going to have to be done for large-scale UPS installations. So again, what that threshold is, what that gets determined. Most people are kind of saying around the 70 to 100 kilowatt range. Obviously, where you were, they're getting more granular than that. Some areas may say it's higher, but typically most data centers are using 1,000 kW or larger UPS systems. I mean, you guys here at CCI know that probably better than anyone else. I don't think you're selling many 200 units. So these larger systems are probably going to start to have these HMAs associated with it. The planning will be led by a registered PE. It'll include site-specific requirements, proximity, thermal limits, occupied spaces, hazard explosion potentials, things like that. It'll also have the emergency response plan packaged in with that. And that will become kind of earlier in the process as you're designing these systems and as those packages are going out for approval. Second part is separation. Oh.
Have you excuse me, have you actually seen one of these HMAs yet? And I'm sitting here as an registered electrical. I'm not really sure I would necessarily want to stamp that HMA. I might stamp, but I would not do it by myself. I'm thinking that a fire protection PE would probably be better qualified to stamp one of these HMAs. And I've asked several questions. Take it away.
Yeah. No, the first question is a good one. Have I seen one of these before? Yes. But typically it was in a large utility scale energy storage facility. So it was a giant field with hundreds of containers out there. But you hit the nail on the head. The HMA analysis was done in conjunction with the electrical, the fire suppression, and the structural engineers doing it because it had defibration panels. So that HMA plan, while it says a registered PE, it really covered kind of multiple trades that were all working together to kind of sign off on that stamp. Again, it doesn't specify which division has to be the one that actually puts the PE stamp on it, but usually they are all very closely in conjunction working together to get to that stamp. When you get down to some of these lithium-ion UPS installations or smaller installations, I have not seen one yet. Most of the time, you're seeing them say, hey, if you have a 9540 certification on the system, or you have things like that, they're kind of letting that go right now because the codes haven't been adopted officially yet. But I think very quickly that will start to say, you're going to need that. And I do think you're right. It's going to be a fire suppression person involved with that certification because they're going to have to show either that they are keeping the level below the 25% LFL threshold, or that they can move enough airflow in the room to basically clear that room in under, I think it's 2 minutes is what it says. there's a designated time frame. Don't quote me on that. But there's a designated time frame of how much air you have to recirculate in that confined space for it to be deemed that it's circulating enough and get the stamp of approval. That answer the questions? Or did I miss one?
No, you got them. Very good. Thank you.
So that's almost a loophole. If you've got enough airflow through there, then you're
Yes.
okay.
So yeah, so if you get into some of these kinds of applications, this is where you think of a UPS room or you think of a switchgear enclosure, a modular enclosure going into a data center, right? You usually have switchgear, you'll have UPS, you'll have batteries, all kind of slapped in one box. So now ideally with this separation, those batteries have to be 3 feet away from the wall. Just like electrical clearance, you have to have 4 feet in front of the gear, that the batteries have to be separated. They're gonna be in their own space. And ideally you could do the gas detection and fire suppression in the entire enclosure. Just a more costly way to do it. So what most people are saying is, okay, push the batteries to one side of the enclosure, and then you just need fire suppression and gas detection in that specific area. It's also less airflow you have to recirculate because you're not trying to circulate the entire enclosure, you're trying to circulate just the battery.
So to follow up on my question earlier, 3 foot is off the backside, not around each cabin.
Yep. So it's off the back. So once you start putting the batteries side by side, you're okay. But
Okay.
from the set of batteries itself in the first rack, you need 3 foot. So a lot of that also becomes where if you don't have ventilation, if you think of a large battery system, you're gonna have giant racks of batteries in a box. There's nothing else in there. So this is a little bit different. If you think of a traditional battery energy storage system, it's just a box chock full of batteries. So obviously you're not gonna have 3 feet because there's nothing else in there. But in this application, when you do it with other gear, the reason they do it 3 feet is because in one of the large scale applications, you'll actually have to open the doors. So if they have a thermal runaway event or they detect the VOC getting above a certain threshold, they will basically open all the doors to ventilate the room. Obviously, if you do that on a rainy day, now you have water going into your batteries. So probably not the best thing. Battery manufacturer's probably gonna say, yeah, you voided our warranty on that one. So a lot of the 3 feet spacing from the back is to basically move it away from the doors that if you have to open them. But it's also against that firewall and against anything else. So if you move this into one side of the enclosure, you have basically a 2-hour rated firewall that would then separate the gear, the electrical equipment or whatever else is in the room from the batteries. And then you have 3 foot of clearance from that.
All right,
Sorry, I would pass the mic back. Questions?
Are there any requirements for spare batteries? Are they the same for, I guess, the UPSs that are energized?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. I would assume if they're in and they're energized, that's probably where it's going to apply. If they're not energized and not tied in, I don't think it would apply, but you're still going to want to have storage considerations around that so you're not degrading the cells inside the batteries. Got another question. I think there's a microphone back there, so if you talk close to that one, it picks it up.
So you said the doors open, like automatically open, or what is it? You
Yeah.
said, so how you, because you also have to worry about when somebody opens it, introduces oxygen and somebody could get arc flash or something. How are you gonna make sure that nobody's in the room or something when those doors auto open?
Yep. So that's more, those doors are more on a traditional BESS type system, where you're just going to have a box with just chock full of batteries, not other equipment at smaller scale. So that one, it's typically going to be a gas piston or some type of automatic device that if it senses you get above a certain threshold, those doors blow open. And then there'd be basically a mag lock, like a handoff auto, that essentially if someone goes up, they can still open it. But if you can basically lock it as well. So it's a remote controlled. It's going to tie back into that fire suppression, fire control panel that's going to have access to that. On a UPS system, something like this, instead of having to open those doors, the thought is if you can basically have an inlet and an exhaust fan, you can move enough airflow without having to open all the doors. Because again, the energy density on those is much less than say a large BESS where you're talking 2 megawatts power and 4 megawatts energy. These are probably much less than that. So it gets really down to the power and energy requirements. That's what's driving a lot of this. So again, the two types of rules I was talking about before, Rule 68, Rule 69. And I realize I keep standing in front of the screen. Sorry about that. Rule 68 deals with defragration ventilation. So this is a traditional, what I would say, a BESS design. So you're talking just batteries, large scale, heavily energy dense system, typically 1+ megawatt, 3 megawatt hours or more. And it's going to have defragration panels. They're essentially blast panels built into these boxes. So they're not going to move, they're not going to worry about circulating air inside that box. They're just going to worry about, okay, if something happens, how do we make sure this thing doesn't explode and shoot shrapnel everywhere? So these defragration panels are designed almost like a plenum in arc-resistant gear, if you're familiar with switchgear. You're just trying to redirect that energy. So you'd asked a question before, what happens if someone goes up and you're trying to prevent arc flash or something like that? These defragration panels are basically trying to channel that blast energy away from people, away from anything else. So if it does have an event or it does have propagation, people don't get hurt. So again, tying back to that real world example we used in the beginning with the 8 firefighters, when they opened that door, it just blew out. The defragration panels are designed to blow out of certain areas, not where someone's going to be standing, to try to contain that blast. But again, this is much more in a typical BESS type design. It's not going to be in UPSs, UPS rooms, things like that. Rule 69 is where you'll probably see more UPS applications. So this is preferred for indoor applications. This is where you get into gas detection, ventilation, and you're trying to basically circulate the air in that room to basically keep that threshold below that 25% LFL. So inside these, they'll use a gas detector that'll basically pick up VOC, it'll pick up hydrogen, it'll pick up a few different things. You'll have an airflow, basically an air meter. You put those sensors at the bottom tops of the racks, and the idea would be that you move enough airflow through that room that you're keeping that level below that 25. If it starts to exceed that 25 after a certain threshold, then it will just basically open the doors. But again, the question is what's that look like? How are you doing it? This is where having that fire suppression or the fire suppression PE sign off on it is, the thought is that they're going to basically want to see a CFD model showing that you're moving enough airflow in that confined space as part of your design.
Do they define what that is?
Yes, they have it. You got to keep the levels below 25%. So I think there is a amount that they say how quickly you have to turn it. I want to say it's like 2 minutes. You have to be able to replace the volumetric amount of air in that room every 2 minutes.
And continuously?
Continuously, correct.
So that's the energy stuff.
Oh yeah, big power consumer.
So all these are good reasons to use lead acid batteries.
Correct. The hard part is not many manufacturers are making lead acid batteries. So VRLA was the old traditional use case. There are still ones out there. Most people are trying to push towards lithium-ion. And if you look at a dollar per energy standpoint, lithium-ion is way more cost effective and way more energy dense. They also have a longer lifespan. A VRLA battery is typically 7-year lifespan, where a lithium-ion's 8,000 to 10,000 cycles, depending how much you're using it. It's a 10, 15-year battery. So again, there's pluses and minuses on both sides, and there's also alternate chemistries. So if you do like a sodium ion, you go to a zinc-based battery, you go to other chemistries, this stuff doesn't apply. So all this is really dictated towards lithium-ion batteries in general. But that's becoming the most widely used and widely adopted because they're just cents per kilowatt, they're the cheapest one out there.
I guess you don't have to, I guess lead acid is just too heavy, I guess. 'Cause like.
Well, I mean, lithium-ion's not light either, so they're not, but it doesn't have the same thermal runaway propagation events. So a lead acid battery, you're not going to have the amount of stored energy, or you're not going to have the hydrogen emission. You're not going to have all the other stuff that come along with lithium ion. That's one of the big things. So again, all of this really is dictated around the chemistry in the battery system that you're using.
Yeah, for UPS, your battery runtime is usually very small because you get
5 minutes
generators anyway.
Yep.
I can see it, the huge advantage that you have with a BESS because you got to have a lot of batteries to provide that much energy. Here, we're not talking about as many batteries, so I think the lead acid batteries makes a whole lot of sense. And there's plenty of people making lead acid batteries for all of our UPSs. And it takes up more space, and it's heavier, it's bigger, but it's not bigger now that you got to put front and rear clearance around your lithium-ion batteries. So, the first cost of lithium-ion is still more, but it's significantly longer life.
Yep.
And this is funny though, because we've been selling lithium-ion batteries for 20 years now, or at least 15. And you finally coming up with this stuff? I mean, come on, guys.
Well,
and one of the, when they first came out with this stuff 15 years ago, I asked him, what do you do at end of life? Because lead acid batteries actually have a really great recycling, but it's the most recycled product on the planet. And it's pretty amazing that closed loop that they have with it. And I said, what are you doing with, what's the end of life with lithium ion? It took them 8 to 10 years to tell me, bury it or burn it, which is neither a good idea.
Yeah.
So do you have anything on the recycling of lithium?
No, I mean, and so there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I think there's two kind of sides of the fence. Some people say recycle it. Some people say basically you can do second life batteries. And so recycle means basically strip it down, try to rebuild it back up, versus second life means, okay, can you basically replace the cells and try to build up the cells, basically get off the build up in the anode and cathode, and then try to redo it that way. I don't know which way is going to win out. Both have their pluses and minuses. At the end of the day, what you see with second life batteries that a lot of people are concerned about, you've seen this in Europe as well, when you go into a second life, who wants to be the one to sign off on it? I mean, people don't want to sign off on lithium-ion batteries now because of the risks and inherent issues you have. So now you want to take a recycled one and then be the one to sign off the liability on that? It's a tougher piece. And then how do you guarantee that you don't have too much degradation of the cells? Versus the recycling side, it's still very expensive, very costly.
So you smart guys need to get the sodium ion better for us. Why don't you guys design some sodium ion so we can sell it? Eddie here wants to sell sodium ion, don't you?
I love salt.
Well, and you bring up a good point too about the lithium ion. Now, in UPS applications, when you go back to kind of this design here, when you're doing just racks of batteries, you can kind of fit them into a smaller space. That's why you see a lot of people, instead of the old design where you'd have them spread out in one big room, you essentially make a battery room. And utilities have been doing this in enclosures for long periods of time. They would always have a separate battery room, separate of everything else.
Well, you got that backed up to the wall.
Well, if this was sitting outside, if you're sitting outside beside some generators, for instance, now these boxes, because of the batteries, are going to have to be 10 feet away.
That's what I'm saying, but you're showing your battery.
Yeah, this is an old design, correct, this is an old design. So in a new design, this would be 3 feet off the wall, but you could take this row of batteries, that row of batteries, put them in front of each other, 3 feet off the back wall, and now you have enough clearance to put 2 rows.
Right.
So if you're having a dual UPS system, 12, 1600 kW, you could put 2, 6, or 9 racks of batteries on the end, and now you are just conditioning or just fire suppression and gas in that one room versus having to do the whole thing. You could still leave them in this configuration, but now you've got to run gas detection, fire suppression, that whole thing, and you've got to circulate enough air in that whole thing. A lot more expensive to do.
This is a big deal for all the modular manufacturers.
100%.
And Georgia's implementing this thing now?
No, not
No.
yet. Brandon, over 2 weeks ago,
Okay, so we'll be years
probably
then.
a couple years.
Oh, okay.
So what I will say is, yeah, it is a big deal for modular manufacturers, and for a lot of people.
I know.
But there are many states, many metropolitan areas that this is starting to come up. So what I was moving forward to is this big one here. Grandfathering of prior installations will be very limited going forward. So that's a very
I feel like
unique.
that PE stamp now, boys.
Yeah, that's a very unique situation prior to previous installations where old iterations of code, if you made a change, typically you were grandfathered in, it's no issue. Now, the way the code is written, it's going to say, and I can't remember the exact verbiage, but it basically says something to the effect of prior installations will be limited in their application. And the reality is, an AHJ can't go in and shut down an existing system if your existing system doesn't meet it. So it becomes back to that, talk about the enforcement, the different stakeholders involved. So an AHJ can't go out to an existing site and say, hey, this doesn't meet code, turn it off. But if you try to pull a new permit to do anything, they immediately have the authority to say, now we can stop it. They also have the ability, which you're seeing in some areas that have not adopted the code, is you're seeing the fire marshals that are due there once a month walk of these sites will walk in and say, hey, you just put lithium-ion batteries in place of DRLA. If you have a fire, we're not coming in. The insurance company finds out about that, drop your insurance policy, now you've got an issue.
It may be required as part of NFPA 70B, which is maintenance of the electrical system.
Correct. So it hasn't even permeated to that yet. So that's where I get back to, all of this is going to affect new installations going forward, but even prior installations that are out there. And again, how all that works, again, is that complicated mess that I talked about at the beginning of enforcement between codes and standards of different agencies, who gets involved. There's a lot of ways that they can influence these decisions without it being just from the AHA or AHJ.
when you say moving the lead acid into lithium ion, if they even make that change, that's a major change, and that would require permitting and everything, because you can't just change from lead acid into, it's not like a retrofit, you can't just retrofit the
But
battery.
typically it wouldn't trigger, so the way it calls is it triggers requirement, so the actual wording of it, if you would have done retrofits before, if you switch different things, you're not necessarily triggering an event that would cause an inspector to come out and recertify. And if you do a straight VRLA to lithium ion swap, from a AHJ perspective, you're staying at the same power, you're not really changing the electrical requirements. Yes, you're changing chemistries, but technically you're not pulling new conductors, you're not doing anything different. So there's a gray area, okay, would that actually trigger them to have to come out recertified?
Well, but you said you brought up insurance, where if.
That's what I'm getting at.
If you do that, that's like, oh, they know immediately what a lead acid versus.
What I'm getting at is though
lithium.
the AHJ may not come out and say, typically an AHJ, as I said at the very beginning, an AHJ is gonna be the one that essentially acts like God. They can turn off your power when you're building a site. Yep, so they could say, hey, this doesn't meet, we're not gonna energize it, you're done. Right, so you have to appeal to that AHJ. But now for existing installations, the AHJ is not necessarily involved. Because again, if you're not pulling new permits, if you're not doing anything, an AHJ is never gonna get involved, they may not see it. But the way the fire departments are firing back against this is saying, oh, when we do our once a month inspection, because they are walking these sites once a month usually, if not more frequently, they will say, hey, you've switched to lithium ion now. Do you have gas detection? Do you have these other things? If not, we're not sending our guys in there for a fire breaks out. If that gets back to the insurance company, says, hey, we're underwriting this insurance policy and no one's gonna come in to protect it, we're dropping your policy. So it almost forces the end users to basically rethink how they do this.
So at that point, they're better off going through the permitting office and just say, oh, you know what, we just give up, you know what, we changed to lithium ion, please get a PE stamp and do that whole process.
Correct. That's where, again, this is kind of the gray area, where, as I also said at the very beginning, I do not envy anyone in this room on this call of what you guys are going through right now, because it's, as you can tell, clear as mud, how all this is gonna affect everything and work out.
And that's why I'm talking, I'm joking with Scott, but reality is, they'll call him up, you 75 years ago, batteries are dead, give me new batteries.
Yep.
So they'll do it, no one is involved. Engineers, everyone there, it's a maintenance change out, and it's prices to order to replace it.
Which is where, like I said, we've
That's
seen,
proven.
me personally have seen in a lot of major metropolitan areas and some of the primary data center markets that end users have had issues with the local fire marshals basically saying, hey, we see you've made a switch here, we're not coming in.
Where are you seeing this?
So this was in central areas of Texas. So bigger parts of Texas has been one of the first ones, but we've seen it in other primary markets. Northern Virginia's had some issues with it as well. They've started to push that.
So let's say using Scott as the seller of the batteries here, wouldn't it be, I guess, wouldn't it be some type of obligation that says, hey, owner person, please
Consult?
send us pictures, because they have to email us for paper trail purposes. Be like, please send us a picture of your cabinet. Make sure these are lithium, lead acid or lithium ion before we place an order, because that way you'll protect Scott from any litigations moving forward. Be like, oh, just switch to the lithium ion battery or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky situation. I mean, there's no good way to put it. And that's why having these discussions now, talking to yourselves at the consulting level is really gonna help, because a lot of times these end users don't know anything about it. They don't know this is coming. So again, as an end user, they just say, hey, our batteries are dead, send us some new ones. Then all of a sudden they get into a world of issues when they can't turn their sites back on, or the fire department saying, hey, we're not coming in. Their insurance company calls and says, hey, we've dropped your policy. Like,
Sometimes the power company won't energize because they require a sign off from the AHJ as well.
yep. So there's a whole host of, again, back to that picture I showed at the beginning of all the different parties involved with this and trying to mitigate it. That's where it becomes a trickier piece.
So
There's a lot of influence involved in this.
So all they have to do, well, I guess going back to, wouldn't it be safer just to say, please email us a photo of the batteries to, with like a close-up, this is a lead acid. If it's lead acid, we have to only give you lead acid. We cannot give you lithium ion.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to the end user to say, hey, place this in order, or we want to replace this. They're buying whatever they're buying. The fact is they don't know that a lot of these codes are coming in. They don't know that a lot of this stuff is happening.
Well,
So is that what you're getting? I guess I'm trying to understand the
but here,
question.
it's kind of like a little conflict of interest. It's like, if say Scott doesn't give these customers their lithium ion, they'll like, smear him or something like that and say, oh, we don't want to deal with CCI ever again, or, and start rumors and all that, which is kind of conflicting too, but then at the same time.
Use somebody else.
This took a turn. Yeah, this took a real fast turn.
We're gonna be telling them what the deal is, so.
Well, but
we're communicating with them, and now, we learn from this too, so it's definitely gonna generate some conversations within our internal. I just got up here to talk to Ed's with Schneider. I don't, so this is good information for us, and we've got to definitely be aware of it so that we can educate our customers, just like the whole reason we do these IEEE meetings is to, keep you guys informed on the stuff that's going on in our industry, and we learn at the same time you do. On new construction, you can at least take it into consideration. When we go and replace a battery after 5 years, and it was a lead acid battery, or 10 years, and we put in lithium ion, then it's on us. So it's definitely not just on the engineers.
And CCI is acting as a trusted advisor to the users.
Well, that's why we, as a front end, I feel it's best to be like, owner, please, give us high quality photos of your cabinet with, including like what that battery, the name, there's always like a nameplate of the battery, right? If this is lead acid, then you're gonna get lead acid, you're not gonna get a lithium ion.
And that's why we want to have these conversations. So again, that's why these are so important. And again, all this information,
Lead
so.
acid is a lot more attractive today than it was yesterday.
Yeah, and I'll have it, I bring this up because I developed this presentation in conjunction with a couple guys from some of the national labs. So that's how we knew about a lot of this, that's how we were involved with this. The national labs have been heavily involved with writing these new codes. So Pacific Northwest, Oak Ridge, Sandia, all of them have been heavily involved with developing this. And the whole point is to educate people about it and get it out to the market of what's going on. So starting with the consultants, because again, the end users at the end of the day don't care. They say, hey, we need this to work. It's just like your car. If your car breaks down, you need a new tire. Do you call and say, hey, I need this tire versus that tire? Typically, it's like, can you make it match? Or I need a tire, just make it work. So.
I have a question about this. Are they just basing this simply off of lithium batteries? Or are they basing it off the design functions that we have out there?
So it's,
Because we have so many features in place, it's almost impossible to go into thermal right away unless you already have a fire.
oh yeah. Yeah, and that's 100% correct. That's one of the things I said. The technology around the power electronics, the conversion, is catching up as well. But it's simply from the codes perspective, it's purely battery chemistry. Because it's lithium ion, they're pushing up
But
this.
I mean, we're talking battery chemistry. How are we creating hydrogen gas? There's no water in these batteries at all.
So in the lithium ion batteries, when they start to go into thermal runaway, one of the first things they will do is emit hydrogen and VOC.
How? Without water.
So
That's where hydrogen comes from.
yeah, and I'm not the chemistry side of it. I know just having looked at it from a lot of the tests that that Sandia's done and things like that, that's what sparked most of this. And so it's the LFL and it's the VOCs that come out. That's the first thing. And if you look at when the batteries go in, that's the first indicator that thermal runaway is coming. But that's also why, again, back to that real world example I used in Arizona, where that's why defragration panels have existed for the period of time that they have. That's been the old way most large-scale energy storage systems were operating. They would use defragration panels to basically contain that blast. Yeah, it might be the electrolytes in the cell. I mean, there's something, again, I'm not the chemistry person. As I said from the very beginning, I'm a mechanically trained engineer. Don't hold that against me. I've just been in electrical most of my career. You got a question you were saying?
Is there any standard for the HMA, when you're writing that document, do you know, I've met this, I did 2-hour rated walls, I provided a sprinkler system, HVAC system, but like, how do you prove that you've emitted as many?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it's going to be, okay, you have to have the usual suspects. So you have to say, okay, the batteries have BMS systems. They have protection in there. There is a plan to mitigate thermal runaway. There is typically a UL certification or large-scale burn test gets factored into that. That's one of the key pieces, and I think that can help kind of eliminate some of it. But exactly what they're going to require, I don't know the answer to that today.
Something like a checklist.
Not that I'm aware of today, there might be, but again, this code came out 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago now. So it's still relatively new. But like I said, we've seen AHJs basically pushing back at a bare minimum saying, look, you need gas detection, you need ventilation, and you need increased fire suppression in these systems.
After we've just told thousands of customers they don't need gas detection, now you're turning around saying we do?
code is, National Electric Code is, yeah. Yeah. As I
It's
said,
gonna ruin this whole industry, because now you just took away all the benefits of lithium batteries.
well, as I said in the very beginning, I don't envy anyone in this room as to how you guys have to deal with this, because it's such a dynamic situation right now. It's not super clear, it's not really adopted, it's very messy.
I mean,
But-
you're increasing the cost significantly.
Oh, hey, Joe,
Yeah, somebody needs to
you can
raise
listen
a
to-
hand here and say, wait a minute now, they need to look better into the manufacturer's plan instead of just saying lithium
Well,
battery.
and again, it comes down to, 5 years ago, I would, and I still agree with you, that a UPS system, very different than a battery energy storage system. As we talked about, a UPS is 5-minute end of life, or 5-minute runtime maybe, and you're not super energy dense. Now, you have the ability to take power for a short term, but not like a BSS that's multi-megawatt and super energy dense systems. But the way most codes looking at it is really that 70 IBC, the International Building Codes, cuts it at 70. They say 70 kilowatts of power, now this code applies. So you're getting down super low. Now, someone will say energy, again, there's different building codes, different thresholds. Most people are saying 70 to 100 is that threshold. But I think you mentioned at 40 kilowatt, they were talking to you guys about it in the in-rack battery systems.
Yeah, they're in round.
And so again, the code doesn't specify exactly what it is, at least from an NEC standpoint. I know IBC puts 70 kilowatt for lithium-ion. Yep.
Do we have anything that small?
That's the problem. No.
I mean, we're talking 2
In-
megawatts.
In-rack are small, in-row are small. Yeah, so that was it. That was the end. I think I've actually gone a little over. Sorry about that.
Good. Yeah, you're gonna have to do some research into this, because they're gonna have to take into consideration the safety factors we have built into these batteries. Like I said, it's almost impossible to go to thermal runaway unless the building's already on fire.
And you look at some of the large-scale energy storage systems, the
building's
power
already on fire.
electronics.
Who cares about the battery? The whole damn building's burning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you get into the power electronics and some of the larger scale systems. So the company I used to work for prior to this was developing the PCS technology. I mean, they're getting into cellular level control. So I mean, they can control these things much better.
Another thing is,
but-
if these things do produce hydrogen gas, it's gonna be at a really low value compared to like VLRA batteries.
Yep. So it's
And we
they're
gotta put it in a monitoring system that may not even detect that?
they're saying that 2.5%, 2.5% in based on the volume of the room is where the airflow starts to have to move. At 5%, you've got to then prove that recirculation a certain amount of time. But it's all staying below 25% LFL is the lower flammable limit. We've seen is, like I said, 5% of the volumetric space. So you've got a gas detector in there that basically is set point at 2.5 to basically alarm. It says, okay, start moving air. The way we've designed these systems so far, at least from our company, is at 2.5%. If it picks it up, it starts moving air in that room. If it gets to 5, then it continuously moves and doesn't stop. And if it gets past 5, it opens the doors. And it shuts
So
off.
this is NFPA 855?
Yes, sir.
Is it a modification to it, or is it a new?
It's a modification. It's a modification. So NFPA 855 has been around. It's just received some pretty critical updates this latest round.
Yeah, because we base ours on temperature too. It's gonna shut down the system before it ever gets to any kind of temperature that's gonna be even close to a fire.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, so if they pick on lithium alone, it's a problem. If they're not, if they look into systems, we don't have a problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the bad part is they are taking almost a very wide-ranging approach at this and just saying it's chemistry-based, that's it.
I mean, could your HMA take into account what he's talking about, where you're saying we had to build this before?
And you include a lot of, they're gonna get into that. So I mean, obviously, it's gonna say BMS systems, it's gonna say all of your other systems, all of that gets rolled into that analysis for sure, and it's gonna be part of that documentation. But again, what they look at and how they enforce it, they're looking for. Exactly, that's the tricky part. I mean, the main thing is they're gonna say you need analysis, but, sorry.
So since the IBC says 70 kilowatts and the NEC doesn't necessarily give that limit, is it possible that an AHJ, like if there was like a 60 kilowatt backup system,